After we had the body tub painted on our 1969 Firebird project called Routy, we decided to attack the rear axle, brakes, and wheels and tires on this project. The wheels and tires were kind of predetermined. The owner had a set of Boyd's Junkyard Dog 17-inch and 18-inch wheels that he wanted to use on this car. So we had to measure the rear axle width with the wheels on it to kind of come up with the proper width of the rear axle so everything would fit under the car. In this case, we decided to order a slightly narrowed rear axle assembly from Currie. Normally, we would put the suspension together and then measure what we needed and order wheels that were custom made for the car. But in this case, these wheels aren't really available anymore, and he already had the set, and it's really not that big of a deal to have Currie make you a rear axle in any width you want. Once we had our wheels mocked up on the original axle and got a measurement of what we thought we needed as far as clearance-wise, we removed the stock axle assembly. It's just a matter of unbolting everything, loosening up all the U-bolts. We were able to use a transmission jack to jack up the rear axle housing, turn the whole thing sideways, and then just kind of work it out from underneath the car. We decided to go with a Currie 9+ rear axle assembly. Now this is a Ford 9-inch style design, but it consists of all new parts. Currie manufactures the housings to whatever width you want in-house. So we ordered ours unpainted and unassembled so we could do the finish work on it. But Currie traditionally builds these with beautiful welds, and they're fixture welded on a jig so that they're nice and true. We don't have to worry about any old parts that are bent or tweaked in any way, and they're just a really nice thing to work with. This one came with a nodular iron center section, which was loaded with 325 gears. We went with a Detroit Truetrac differential, and we painted it with DuPont Hot Hues Hot Rod Black. Now these rear axle assemblies are kind of like big tinker toys. They're not very hard to put together. The first step was to make sure it was all cleaned off, run a small bead of RTV sealer around the area where the center is going to bolt to the housing, drop in a new gasket, and then carefully lower the center section into the rear axle housing on the studs. We used what are called jet nuts to hold this thing in place. Once we kind of spun them down with an impact wrench, we went back and torqued them to Currie's recommended specification and made sure everything was nice and tight. From there, we took the entire housing with the center section installed and placed it under the car, slipped it up over the leaf springs and put some new U-bolts in, tightened up all the nuts on the U-bolts, and the next step from there was to lightly lubricate the Currie 31 spline axles and slide them into the housing. These axles have an O-ring seal on the end, so we put a little bit of assembly fluid on those, and you got to make sure you put them in carefully so you don't hurt any of the seals. Once the axle kind of hits home, we mocked everything up using our Baer 13-inch rear brake rotor and took our 18-inch wheel, slipped it up onto the rear axle, and checked clearance side to side, and everything looked really, really nice. The next step was to install the rear caliper brackets, which are actually part of the axle retainers to keep the axles in that housing, and drop the caliper on and connect the Baer supplied stainless brake hose that comes with this Baer Track rear brake kit. Single piston calipers, 13-inch rotors. This thing's going to have plenty of braking power. For the front brakes, we're also using parts from Baer, a Baer Track kit. It's a very complete kit, and the process here is to remove the original style one-piece hub and rotor assembly and clean the axle and the bearing off, and then install the new caliper bracket, which slips over the axle snout and uses the same mounting location as the steering arms. Baer supplies hardware to make this happen. Once you put the new bolts through and torque them down with the lock nuts, you can slip the new hub on. And it's a two-piece hub and rotor combo, which is nice because it's a little bit lighter than the original. Plus, it keeps some of the heat out of the hub from the rotor. It doesn't transmit a lot of the heat through. So the hub just slips on and locks down with a traditional style hub nut, and then you can slide your new rotor on, 13-inch rotor, zinc washed, directional, drilled, vented, slotted, everything you could want. and slip the calipers over the top and run those bolts down tight. At that point, you can turn the whole assembly and run the hoses into your either existing brake lines, or in our case, we're using all new brake lines, which were supplied from a kit from Classic Industries. We ended up replacing all of the hard lines on this car with a stainless kit we got from Classic Industries, and we did some detail work like powder coating that master cylinder so it looked nice and didn't rust. One note is that these front brakes from Baer require at least a 17-inch wheel for clearance. We actually had to shave our calipers just a hair to get the wheel to fit right. But once we had it all together, the next step was a quick brake bleed, and now we've got a wicked set of brakes on this car, so it'll stop as good as it goes.